Alright guys, today's going to be a very special video. Right now I'm fighting for my life. Been so for the last year, and um, really it's the car situation's kind of dragged me down. It's gotten me to the point of bankruptcy. Um, I've been pretty much on my own with the very little help, the exception of one gentleman from New Jersey, and then I had a little bit of help from another guy in Sholo. He's going to be coming out eventually, hopefully, to help me, and we'll get into that. But very little help, no help from friends or family. Just pretty much doing the work on myself, and like I said, help from one guy in Jersey and one guy in Sholo. But I thought I'd make this video so that you can actually see. I take you through my journey, and maybe if you see, because my garage is starting to turn into an auto zone at this point, that you'll have a better understanding of what I am going through. Currently can't get financed for a new car. That's out of the question. This is a 4-car garage. We've had 4 cars in the span of less than a year. We're going to go through all of that today. And as you can see, these are all the parts and everything. Now, my mom had passed away, and when she was dealing with her health issues, she was very proactive on everything. And some of my friends have kind of said I haven't been proactive on things. Well, I have. I fought this thing tooth and nail. I'm literally pulling car parts out, putting car parts in, so I think they're wrong about that. But we're going to take you through my journey today, and you're going to just see everything. So let's start with the first car. Now, I want to share this little story with you. Years ago, and I've been plagued with car problems from the day my mom died. But years ago, a mechanic told me if I did not want to deal with car issues, well, I should have bought a new car. Well, that's what I did in 2014. I bought a brand new 2014 Ford Focus. Got a screaming deal from it with the help of a family member. Her $1,296, $13,000, and then there was $4,000 trade-in from the Fusion that I had. I got a Ford Focus, brand new car, should have lasted 10 or 15 years. Out of all the cars that I could have got, and as you can see, this paperwork, there's probably 2-3 inches thick of paperwork on my new car. Out of all the cars that I could have picked, I get one that has a known transmission issue. This would be a whole nother video to make, but in short story is that the manufacturer knew, they knew that the transmissions on these cars were defective, and they sold them to people anyways. It made the news. There was news articles here. There was a lawsuit. 90% of the people fell through the cracks. I exhausted all my avenues within the last year. Attorney General, BBB, Senator Kirsten Sinema's office. I got the news station involved. I fought Ford for months. I've had not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 transmission failures on this car. And over the summer, the transmission began to overheat. A bleeder valve, there's like a little air valve in the transmission, popped out, and then it didn't want to accelerate. But it's been in a shop 3 times. And the third repair, I had to go through some kind of a legal settlement, because what happened was that the technician, not the technician, but the guy that tows the cars, so was supposed to bring it back, and when he brought it back, the bumper fell off, and he tried to fix it himself. He did a half-assed job, and so that happened. I'm going to get into that in a little bit, why the bumper fell off in the first place. But transmission failed. I sold the car for $1,450 to Copart. It sold in an auction lot for $2,900. I could not sell it on Craigslist. I just wouldn't have the heart in it to do it, because this car had so many problems. So on top of that, and this is the repair. This is all of the repairs I've had on my new car, and you can see how thick that is. So not only did the transmission go out, and this was the real kicker. So from August of 2020 all the way up to June of 2021, I spent $1,500 on the car right before it broke down. I put a new set of tires on because the tires were so worn that the meshing was coming out. Like you could see the little. I mean, you literally, if I drove it, I would have had a blowout and I could have caused an accident. And I tried showing this to people, and I said, "Look, this is how bad my car is. I can't do Uber. I can't do things with this," and nobody listened to me. So I got the tire set. That was $550. Then before that, I had not one, not two, but three batteries in because I was having an electrical draw on the car. So I had a battery replaced in April, then I had a battery replaced in October or August, and then in October. So I had three batteries replaced. Then I had the brakes all redone because the place that did them years ago never did them right. So they put in a brand new set of brakes and rotors for free. I paid to have the brake fluid flushed. Then I started leaking coolant from the reservoir. Installed a new reservoir on it myself. Then a few weeks later, check engine light comes on. And the kicker was I could avoid doing that repair if I had known the transmission was going to blow up. But I ended up having to replace the canister purge valve and a canister purge solenoid that was $560 after the diag fee. So I racked up a total of $1,500 on credit on that, and I'm still paying it off to this day. Took a complete loss on this car. Now, let me talk about the tires, and I was having suspension issues as well because they said you needed at least $2,000-$3,000 worth of suspension work on the Focus. Now, why was that? Well, this was 1 in a million. 1 in a million. I was at an intersection, and I was at a stoplight, and this young kid in a car rear ends me. 1 in a million. The car had insurance. This is the accident report. Zabir Ahmed Ali rear-ended me. He was at fault. He was cited for it. He was what was called an excluded driver, meaning that the vehicle had insurance, but the owner of the vehicle excluded him from coverage. So when I went to file an insurance claim, the insurance company denied that claim because he was excluded. So I was up a creek on that. But once again, I was proactive. I did everything I could. I contacted 5 attorneys, the management office of Goldberg and Osborne. I spoke with Alexis Breyer herself from the husband and wife law team. She's on TV sometimes. She directly communicated with me, said there was nothing they could do. Osborne, the management attorney there, said they were nothing they could do. I had done previous business with Goldberg, so I thought maybe they would help me. No. I reached out to my friend Paul Iso. He was a client of mine at Macy's. He's a personal injury attorney. He researched it. He said there's nothing you can do. Then I reached out on the AZ State Bar. A guy named Carl Ritter reached out. We talked. He said if the guy has no assets, anything, it's pointless to sue him in court. Then I talked to another lawyer. His name was Jules Grangine. He said I can walk you through all of this, but it's going to be nothing more than getting a piece of paper like the judgment. So I said, okay, why not try to get this guy cited for having no insurance? So I reached out to the police department. They actually went down, they served him papers. The court let him off because the vehicle had insurance. I went down to the courthouse physically to submit an appeal, and the appeal was denied because I'm not an involved party. Only the defendant and the plaintiff can file appeals or motions. So I fought that thing for like 6 months. So if anybody says I'm not proactive, I have spent years, this has been 2 to 3 years of my life consumed trying to resolve the Ford Focus. But I got nowhere on the transmission. I did everything. I couldn't get a lawyer to get the transmission replaced. I went to the Better Business Bureau probably 8 times, the Attorney General's office 8 times. I went to the Michigan Attorney General's office. They wouldn't even respond to them. Ford directly. As a last-ditch effort, I did go to Ford transmission settlement. I filed the claim and I got nothing. They denied my claim a year later. I even reached out to Capstone Law, the attorneys handling it. They said there was nothing that they could do. That it was it was done. I just fought it, sold the car, and I took a complete loss on it. So that's what you get with the brand new car that was supposed to last me 10 to 15 years and really had no major repair issues until that canister purge valve, but the transmission itself. But, very upsetting, and I did everything I could. So what was plan B? Well, I had a 1994 Plymouth Sundance that was gifted to me and my younger brother from my grandparents. I'll take a look at the engine bay here. Now, this car broke down, and this was once again no fault of my own. I supposedly had a timing belt replaced in 2011 when I had a head gasket done and everything on it. I drove it home one day in 2016. The car didn't want to start. So after the whole ordeal with the Ford Focus, I was preparing to get this car done. I did all the maintenance on it. I flushed the coolant. I changed the oil out myself. I replaced this little PCV valve right here. I put a new fuel filter on. What else did I do? Air filter. And then I started to try and do the diagnostic for why it wasn't starting, because we were not getting any spark. So replaced the spark plugs, nothing. Replaced the ignition coil, nothing. Replaced the distributor, the Hall effect pickup, and the ignition rotor, nothing. So I reached out to the Plymouth Sundance Dodge Shadow Car Club group, and they told me that I had a broken timing belt. So now I had to get somebody out here to look at it and diagnose what was going on with it. So I called the company called Your Mechanic out, and they sent a guy out. He looked at it. They charged me about $100, and he said, yes, you've got a worn timing belt. However, when I went to follow up with Your Mechanic, this is shop number 1. I've had 5 mechanics look at this car. It's been a year, still can't get this car fully running. So I went to follow up with Your Mechanic. Your Mechanic says, we don't have any technicians that can do a timing belt repair in Laveen, because I'm far out here. That's the problem. So they couldn't follow up with it, even though on this car, a timing belt is not the most difficult job in the world to do. You don't have to take the engine out. And the timing belt is located right here underneath this case. So the previous mechanic that supposedly did it didn't do it. So I ended up fighting Your Mechanic for several weeks to get my money back because, one, they couldn't follow up on the work, and I had to spend another $150, have somebody else come out. And two, there was more things going on with the car that they didn't tell me. So after 3 weeks of fighting them, they finally gave my money back. So now let's talk about shop number 2. I called the Better Company out, called Wrench. They told them my situation. They recommended still doing a diag on it, and they sent out a technician, a 30-year master tech that knows how to work on engines. His name was Rick. First thing Rick does when he comes out, let me see if I've got that part. I don't know where it is. I still have it. I don't have it. I don't know where it is. But Rick comes out. Oh, here it is. Rick comes out. And the first thing that he does, and I'll get this here, is he pulls the trunk lever. So he pulls on the trunk lever. And when he does that, he pulls on the rather large piece of plastic right here. And he rips, this is my lower steering wheel column cover, in half. And he breaks this. And because this car's 30 years old, this part's very difficult to find. They don't make it anymore. So he did that. And he looks at the car, and he takes the timing cover off, and he says, yeah, I agree, your timing belt's definitely worn. It needs to be replaced. However, I don't think that's the issue. I think it's your crankshaft, which is down below. The crankshaft is the big rod underneath the engine that spins everything, and he says he thinks that's bad. So what he does is he says, well, I recommend you taking it to a shop. They'll hit it under a lift and they'll do all this, yada, 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 yada. So I did more research and I communicated this with the car club group, and the car club group for Plymouth, Sundance, and Dodge Shadow said, no, your car needs a timing belt. It's worn. Your crankshaft's probably not bad. They never fail. Your timing belt is worn around the crankshaft sprocket, and that's why it's not able to turn over. And they said, I guarantee if you take that belt off, you're going to see that. So regardless of the fact, I still needed a mobile mechanic to come out and do the timing belt. So I called, I complained to Wrench about this. After weeks of arguing with them, they did refund me the $150 for the diag fee. They sent another technician out, Nick, to do it. He says the same thing as the Dodge Shadow. He says, yeah, I think the car will run when I put the timing belt in. And they ended up charging me way more for it. It was like $400 something, and they didn't even do the water pump, which is what usually should be done. They recommended it over the phone, but they didn't do it. So Nick does the timing belt in 3 hours, 4-hour job. Car still doesn't want to start. So Nick put starting spray in the TBI. This is the throttle body, and the car tries to start up for a minute and then it dies. He says, well, you need to have a fuel pump replaced on this car. So I was like, okay, that's not the end of the world. However, he doesn't want to do it because of spider webs. So I told this to the Dodge Shadow people, and they all laughed at him. Not wanting to, and it could have been clean anyway. So now we have to have the car towed to a shop. So like I said, I didn't have much help. There were very few people that helping. And now I'm going to talk about my crazy friend Alexis. One person that, because I was literally trapped at home. It's 120 degrees out. Walking just to the store is an hour away. So I had one friend that was helping, and she said, hey, I've got tows left on my AAA. I can have your car towed to the Firestone up here and for no charge. So we're going to talk about that now, because there's like 5 different things with this car. So AAA comes out, and the tow truck driver, he doesn't slowly push the car in. He just gets in it, he backs it out, and he lets it roll down the driveway and turns the steering wheel real hard to back it up to get it on his truck. And then I went up with Alexis to Firestone. When I get into the Firestone office and I'm talking to the manager, his name's James, about the repair and everything, Alexis comes in and says, Jess, the tow truck driver can't get the key out of the car. So I was like, what? So I was like, okay, I go out there and I try and get the key out, and it won't come out of the ignition. So James from Firestone said, oh, we'll look at that too, and if we can't get it out, if we can get it out without parts, we won't charge you. So now let's go to the key issue. So I told my friend, I said, well, we need to file an insurance claim or talk to AAA about this, because we don't know if they caused damage to it or did that intentionally. It was just odd because the last 2 mechanics that worked on the car, the key always came out. It never got stuck. So why all of a suddenly? So I tried to reach out to AAA. AAA would not speak to me. Even though this is my car, I'm the owner of this vehicle, they would not speak to me because I don't own I'm not the member. So I eventually filed a complaint with the BBB. In the meantime, Alexa said, oh, I'll talk to them. I'll have my husband call because he's the primary on the account. Said, I don't want to sit here and wait for her. So I filed the complaint with the Better Business Bureau. And I really got no follow-up with Alexis. The Better Business Bureau followed up with me, and they said that they spoke with Alexis, not her husband Josh, who she said was the primary on the account. She told them that she didn't want to have them do the claim and that the key had always been stuck in the car, which was a complete lie. So I tell Alexis about this, and Alexis says, "Oh, I didn't tell them that. They said they needed to look at it." And the whole point of having AAA at least investigate is maybe they would have fixed it if it was something as little as shifting the transmission over and trying to pull the key out, or just use an old spray of carbon or something. At least let them look at it and make that determination. Don't tell them that it was like that when it wasn't. So they ended that, and I couldn't even speak to them about it. And that was it. I was done with Alexis, She kind of sold me down the river. Meanwhile, the car's in Firestone. And a fuel pump job, James said, "Oh, yeah, we'll be done by the weekend. Order the part. Should be same-day job. 2 or 3 days." The car was in the shop for 16 days. Over 2 weeks. And I kept getting excuse after excuse after excuse. I said, "Oh, we put the fuel pump in. It was pumping fuel and gas. But when we put it in the car, it wasn't wanting to start. Then we swapped out relays, and we're waiting for parts. Then it was the mechanic wasn't in the shop." So I reach out. I'm trying to find help online. And I'm talking to a guy who lives in the area on the Dodge Shadow page. And he says, "I'll look at it." But after 2 weeks, I had to get the car back. And I eventually called Firestone customer service. They went back and forth with them. It was another 2 days before I got the car back. I spent $85 getting it towed back home. They didn't charge me for the dike, but when I got the car back, it was in fucking shambles. All the lines at the fuel pump were disconnected. They didn't reconnect everything. I had $30 of fresh gas in that car. They took it out, didn't put it back in. My battery that was completely dead. I had it charged and everything tested before I even brought it into Firestone. There was a little hose right here that was missing. My brand new fuel filter. They took it out and didn't put it back on. That was gone. And then the lugs on the passenger side tire, I'll go over here, it's hard to see, but they damaged the bolts, and I ended up having to get those replaced for a discount. So this tire here I had to get replaced because they removed the filler neck. They get a little line that goes to the tank right here, so they removed that. So I had those replaced. And then there were a couple other things once the car was running that were showing themselves. And then they dismantled my steering wheel column. There was oil everywhere, and the car started leaking oil and transmission. I don't know if you can see the puddle, but there's like it's hard to see. That little stain there is from the old transmission fluid that was leaking out. So it had an oil leak, and it was leaking transmission fluid. It's still leaking transmission fluid. So now we'll get to the insurance claim, because I file an insurance claim with Firestone. I've called customer service 15-20 times. So they get it over to their claims adjuster. He calls me back. This is in August. And he says, he basically gets my side of the story. He says, "Well, we'll have a third-party person come out. They're a certified mechanic. They'll do the inspection to determine whether the damage was our fault or not. And he'll get back to you in a couple of days." So Mr. Ron Powell reached out to me a few days later, told him what was going on. He tells me that the car needs to be towed to a shop to have it looked at. So I reached out to Chet and I tell him this. I said, "I'm not paying for this thing to be towed somewhere." So they respond back and they basically say, "We're not going any further with this. We're going to give you $85 if you sign a release." They give me the release. They put a Toyota Tundra on the release when it's a Plymouth Sundance. It's two completely different cars. They couldn't even get the release right there. They had their heads so far up their asses on this, and even the guys seemed overwhelmed. I'm like, dude, this is not good if you're overwhelmed with claims. But they basically said, "We're not going any further with it." And I called Powell back and I asked him if he had heard anything. He said no, and he wished me luck. I had gotten so upset over this that I actually called Phoenix PD's non-emergency line. I wanted to see if I could press charges because it was borderline vandalism, theft. Parts weren't returned back. They said, oh, it's a civil matter, and then I reached out to my community actions officer, and he says, well, you can file a report online, if you get the information. I did that. I couldn't go further with it, but I was just that angry. I had never been so livid in my life. Then fixing everything cost like another $300. So I was desperate at this point to get somebody to help because I couldn't get anybody out here. I talked to 1, 2, 3 people on the Dodge Shadow Sundance page. They all wouldn't help me. Oh, I'm busy. Pass me off to this guy. Oh, I'm busy. Pass me off to this shop in Mesa. There's a guy in Mesa that knows how to work on these cars. His name's AJ. And I'm going to get to him in a little bit. But they kept getting passed off. I even reached out to my friend Sophia, who I used to work with. She said that her brother-in-law was a mechanic and that she'd talked to him. That was back in August. I have not heard from her. I have not heard anything from her. So this is why I'm so frustrated with just trying to get one of these cars. Nobody follows up. So I had a few guys on there too that were willing to just walk me through everything on Facebook. There was one guy real helpful, but he told me if he was here he'd help, but there was one guy. A real nice guy. I talk to him all the time. His name's Kale. Bless his heart. He's the only one who would actually come out here and look at the car. He messages me. He says, hey, I'm in Show Low, but I'm going to be in the Phoenix area for something. I'll come out and look at your car and we'll get this thing running and everything fixed. So he comes out. He looks at it. He reconnects all the lines at the fuel pump and I get everything ready. I have to get a new battery. I have to fuel filter, gas, everything. So he comes out and looks at it. He gets the lines all hooked up, and it's some kind of an electrical fault at the pump. So he does some wiring, and bam, in 30 minutes, he does more than what Firestone did in 2 weeks. He gets fuel coming up to the system. However, the car still won't start. And he tells me, he says, Jess, you need to replace your fuel pressure regulator, that thing right here, because fuel was leaking out of it. It wasn't coming out. He says, once you put that in, then the car is going to start. So put that in the following day. And he also said you need to replace your fuel lines eventually at the filter. So I put that in. Bam, the car starts up. First time in 4 years. It's blowing smoke off the manifold because it's been sitting. So once that happens, I eventually do some more tune-up stuff. I replaced the thermostat. We've got a new ERG valve. Flush out the radiator. And PCV, I already did that. It's got new plugs. So, okay, once I get everything fixed on it, then it's time to take it for a test drive. Drive it around the street, 2 laps, nothing. It dies after 2 laps. Spent 2 weeks trying to figure it out. No help or anything, and the only help I had right at that point was Facebook, people online, and the guy from Sholo. That was the issue, was he's on the other side of the state, so it's like he can't just come over here. So 2 weeks, I found out the distributor that I installed had a bolt, and we'll go over here, I'll show you, had a loose bolt. So this is the original distributor. This is the original one, but on the left side here, on the remanufactured distributor, that screw was smaller than the other one, so you couldn't seat the distributor cap over it. And that was what was causing the car to stall. So once I got that in, I was able to drive the car finally. And I drove it over to Discount. I got the tires done. That was another $350. Got that done. Then I was like, okay, let me drive it for a couple weeks, see if everything's sound. The car had a few issues. Like I said, transmission fluid leak, front motor mount bad. It does need front brakes. Probably needs a brake fluid flush. But there were two concerning things that were going on. Windshield wipers. I ended up spending $100 to get the wiper motor installed. Still can't figure that out. I rewired everything, but can't figure that out. But two things that were going on with this car. One of them was the transmission, and then every once in a while, this car didn't want to start up right away. I'm going to get to that. That was one thing. Like, you'd turn it, and it would try to crank. You'd have to do it like 2 or 3 times, and then it would start. The second thing was, I had an issue with my fuel filter. And we're getting light here, so we'll be able to show you. So, I was driving the car, and I was in a busy street, and the car just all of a sudden died. And I had a couple good Samaritans help me, and we'll try to see this. But what had happened is my fuel filter, which is right here, it's hard to see because it's so dark, but my fuel filter, which my finger's on, was hanging down here, and it hit something, and it wasn't functioning anymore, and the lines completely failed. So I ended up having to replace that. I spent $200 to have the car towed home. I redid the fuel lines, so redid those that go to the filter and mounted it properly. So that was $200. I had to put more gas in the car. So once I got that in, it was driving fine. Then another couple weeks goes by. Then I start to hear a humming noise coming from the fuel pump. I'm like, okay, that fuel pump that Firestone put in was not bad. They said, oh, we put it in gasoline, it was working, but in the car it wasn't because of the electrical issue. They left a perfectly good fuel pump in the car, thinking that it wasn't working. So eventually I was hearing a humming noise. And people were telling me, yeah, your fuel pump's going away. So out of desperation, I did the fuel pump job myself. I dropped the gas tank. I lowered it down, removed the fuel pump, removed the sending unit, replaced both of those, and the filler neck gasket. Firestone damaged that too, because that had already been replaced in 2011. That was leaking gas, so I replaced that rubber gasket. And so, inside the gas tank, Firestone had left the old strainer. So the pump has like a little flapper at the end that filters the fuel, and it, pumps it. It's like a little mesh strainer. They left the old mesh strainer in there, and it ended up causing the fuel pump to fail. So got that replaced. However, the intermittent starting issue was still going on because there's potentially carbon buildup or something going on inside the cylinder head. I thought it had something to do with a rethread that I did years ago. I tried doing the rethread. The damn rethreader fell in the cylinder head, so I need to have that cylinder head replaced. So I was gifted a cylinder head. So I have the part. I'm just waiting on the guy from Sholo to come out and do it. However, the cylinder head, even if I could do it myself, I can't drop this on the car. It's got to be machined. So it's got to be prepped. So I'm working that out with the guy in Sholo, but it's just been back and forth trying to get him out here. So this had really taken an emotional toll on me, and one guy had reached out. And he saw this. He knew the story behind the car. He knew it was my grandmother's car. A lot of people felt bad. But one guy reached out from Jersey, and he said, hey, Jess, I'll tell you what. I've got a 1991 Pontiac Sunbird. All you got to do is have it shipped, and it's yours. So I did my research on this car. He said it had 120,000 miles on it. And did my research. There were, if they're in good running condition, or at least over $2,000. The shipping was $1,200. So I was like, okay, I got to do something. I have no help. So I paid the $1,200 to have it shipped. And the guy even says, I'm going to have a shop look at it, make sure the brakes and everything are okay. And the short story is the guy has good intentions. He's just not a mechanic. He doesn't know. He didn't have a good mechanic look at the car. So after I paid $1,200 to have this car shipped, it wasn't what I was expecting. Nothing had been done to this car in years. The tires have a date stamp from 2013. On all tires, they have a manufacturer date, so you're able to read that. Those tires were 9 years old, dry rotted and cracked. Oil hadn't been changed probably in a year. The coolant was so dirty that you couldn't tell what color it was. I'm going to get to that towards the end of the Sunbird conversation here. And there was a rat's nest inside the trunk, and then there was a rat's bait station underneath the air filter housing. That was dirty. That filter was so dirty, it was stuck. I had to use a wrench to open the housing to replace the filter. The belt was bad. The brakes were bad. Master cylinder was failing on it. And I mean, it was leaking oil from the intake manifold gaskets, the valve cover. It just had a lot of things. And these cars are fairly simple to work on, so I said, okay, I'll make the best of it. And then the little bit of help I got from my family, my step-uncle comes out on Christmas, and he looks at it, and I get mixed reactions from him. He says, oh, you got yourself into a pickle with this car. But then he looks at it and he says, oh, it doesn't sound bad for a $1,200 car. I'll have my guy look at it. We can set up something to have my guy look at it for free. So he follows up with me. We're supposed to get it down there, and then he follows up and says, oh, just sell the car. Not a good investment. Don't keep it. So I was like, I don't know what to do at this point. So just try to make the best of the situation. So I'm back and forth with the guy, and he starts sending me antifreeze and parts and things, and I'm running back to the Advanced Auto up here. And so I go to try and change the oil and look at everything. The damn drain bolt's stripped. I get these little bolt out kit. You can't even put them on there. The bolt is so flat. And somebody told me on a Pontiac page that you have to buy a siphon, a pump, run it down the dipstick, and pump out the oil that way. So then I went to try and change the coolant. And the reservoir looked like somebody had dropped the Butterfinger in it. So I drained the coolant out of the radiator. Unbeknownst to me, somebody had put head gasket sealer in it. So when I flushed out the radiator and everything, the head gasket blew. It's blowing white smoke out the manifold. The radiator was leaking. So I was done with that car. And I'm back and forth with a guy in Jersey, and he offers to pay for he says, oh, I'll help you with the repairs. And I said, no, this is going to be, thousands of dollars at this point. It's going to be a rabbit hole. And then he says, oh, I can give you the shipping back, or I can give you another car. So eventually he gives me a 2000 Chevy Camaro. This time he pays for everything. Pays to have it shipped here. The shop that he had the Sunbird looked at, I'll conclude with the Sunbird here, was Pep Boys. And I told him, no, they're not the greatest. So I ended up, and I dodged a bullet on the Sunbird. I sold it to Copart. It was probably worth $300 if I had sold it to a salvage yard. There was an error in their system, and I sold it to them for $1,100. They honored it. And that's just how the car market is right now. They're so desperately looking for cars because right now there's inflation, there's a chip shortage of cars on dealership lots. Production has stopped, supply chain issues, so used car prices shoot up through the roof. People don't listen to the news. I'm like, used cars are going for more than new cars. And you can't get a new car. Guy I work with had to wait weeks to get his new Dodge Challenger. So, I mean, people don't realize that because they haven't been through it. So, Ended up selling the Sunbird for $1,100 to a salvage yard, and as soon as I get the damn thing, literally I have it backed out in the driveway, and the tow truck driver gets it, and he says, just start it up and have it park it out in the street for me. I go to start the thing, and the damn thing don't want to start, and my heart stopped, because I'm like, oh, shit. So, but fortunately, the tow truck driver had to jump, and it was just a battery that needed to be charged. So, got rid of it, dodged a bullet. Now we're at the Camaro. So, like I said, he pays for everything to be shipped. He says, I'm going to even take it to my shop where I do auto body work. So he takes it to Union Auto. They've been in business, I guess, for 40 years. They look over everything. He's had new coil packs put in. He had the oil changed. He replaced the filter himself. The battery is new. It's only a year old. So he has them look at it. It's got new exhaust and everything. And it's leather interior, everything. It's in a lot better shape than the Sunbird was. So I get it here. Everything looks good. I drive it for a few days. Check engine light comes on. I get I think it was a P0420 catalyst inefficiency code. So, which is not the worst thing in the world. We thought it was oxygen sensors, so he sends oxygen sensors. But this time he says, I'll just have you take it to the shop and I'll pay for it. So we take it out to Mesa, to Revive Auto. I speak with AJ, the guy that couldn't do the Sundance repair. Now he quotes me $840 to put that cylinder head in, minus any parts. So that's what he charges for that if I decide to go that route. So I take the Camaro to the shop. On top of that, I have some kind of intermittent issue with the window. So AJ's looking at it for the catalytic converter code and the window regulator. So the guy in New Jersey ships out all the parts. And, he offers to pay for everything. And I'm grateful for it. So, but the car's in a shop for 12 days. And AJ says, well, your catalytic converter is bad. It needs to be replaced. Your water pump is bad. It's failing. You need to replace your upper and lower radiator hoses. And your oil pressure switch, I'm going to point to it here. It's a little switch that goes into the engine here, right where my finger is leaking oil. It needs to be replaced. Charges $1,700 to do the repairs. And then the window regulator, of course. So, get the car back, and he says, well, it needs another $929 of maintenance. You need to flush and fix the seal on your transmission. Your rear differential fluid needs to be flushed. Your brake fluid needs to be flushed. That's the one thing I was telling the guy in Jersey about, was that Pep Boys isn't very good. The guy in Jersey gives me the Carfax, and Pep Boys states that they've done the brake fluid on this car. However, it hasn't been changed. So I told him that. I said it could be an error and everything. And so, on another note too, I forgot to mention about the Sunbird. Let me get back to that real quick. So, the Sunbird, I forgot to mention this. So the Sunbird, when I got it, I paid more for it than what it was worth to ship. And I forgot to mention this, so I'm going to mention it real quick. I did my research, and, if it had true mileage on it. However, when I got the Sunbird, the odometer was broken on it. It was stuck. So that was one of the concerns on that. So we don't know how many miles that car had on it. So thank God the Camaro was here, because I don't know what I would have done with the Sunbird. But it did not even have true mileage on it. So it was really just diminished the value of the worth. So, okay. Rear differential, brake fluid, power steering, and the rear differential need to be done. So now I'm driving the car for a week, and a couple weeks, and the check engine light comes on again. This time I get a P0440, which is a general evap code. So I go over my gas tank, I clean the gas cap, wipe it, and I make sure it's at the 3 clicks. Put it in, shut the code off. I buy an OBD2 reader. I shut the code off, and I drive it. Code comes back on. This time it's a P0446 code, meaning that the vent valve circuit is not getting proper voltage. So there's some kind of malfunction there. Most common cause is the canister purge valve. So I actually replaced that myself. Shut the code off. The code still comes on. Then I go over and replace the gas cap. Code still comes on. I'm not losing fuel efficiency because I'm keeping track of my miles per gallon. And it could be anything. It could be the fuel tank itself, the little vent valve on top of it. It could be the vapor canister underneath the driver fender. At that point, it needs to be diagnosed. I don't know what I'm going to do about that yet. I'm still determining if there is an issue. However, when I'm driving the car, I'm experiencing a more serious symptom. I'm hearing a loud humming noise coming from the alternator area, the drive belt area, while I'm driving. And so I'm pretty sure that the alternator is failing because it progressively got worse. I got out to the car the following day. Tried to start it, lights were on and everything, but then when I turned the key, everything just blacked out. Didn't want to start. So I was like, okay, this is definitely a bad alternator. Hauled the battery up to O'Reilly's just to be sure. I tested both the alternator and the battery myself. It seemed to be charging correctly. Battery tested good at AutoZone. Ended up pulling off, and as you can see, I've replaced the alternator. Pulled that off. I took the alternator up to AutoZone. They tested it. They said it was fine. Fine, but we replaced it anyways because, thank God the guy in Jersey helped out with this. So put the alternator in. Noticed, and somebody pointed this out to me, that the drive belt was coming off of the tensioner pulley. So I ended up having to replace the tensioner pulley. That was gifted to me. So that was put on there. I put that on myself. This was a big job. I mean, if I had to shop do this, it'd be close to $1,000. The alternator alone is $450 to put in if I had it done. So remove the hose, drain the coolant, remove the drive belt, put the alternator on. And so just trying to see if that's going to work out the kinks. Now, I drove it yesterday. It seemed like the alternator was not charging the battery. I'm going to drive it this morning, see if that does. If anything else comes up, if the humming starts. But that's where I'm at this point. I also noticed it's burning a little oil. So I replaced the PCV valve up there. That should help with that. But right now, not 100% sure with the car yet. Still have to drive it to know. But, I want people to understand what I've been going through. I mean, and maybe if you visibly see it. And not only that, I mean, it's bankrupt me. And I'm literally, resorting to having to ride my bike. And that's a whole nother story because I've had to replace the tubes probably 7-8 times on 2 different bikes. I've been through 2 bikes. Swapped out the tires from my other Schwinn here. Had to put new tires on them, a new rim. I mean, I am literally riding my bike into the ground. I had to tear out metal from the seat because it was bending back. I had to buy a bike pump, 3 things of slime ooze. I've had over $200 just in bike stuff. So when you don't have a car and you're having to spend money on your bike, it diverts your funds from this. But, just know, people, this is the journey that I've been through. This is the ordeal that I've been through over the span of a year. You can see the paperwork. You can see the parts, what's been done to this. I mean, it's just, it's unbelievable. 4 cars in a year. I don't know what to say. But maybe if you guys get a better perspective of it, you'll understand. That's all I can say.